Sound. Oh, there you go. That sound that that ding sounds familiar. Parang narinig ko na yan sa ano jungle, ano yun? Yung kay The Rock.
Yeah, Jumanji.
Jumanji.
Jumanji. Yun, 'di ba? Ching! Tapos
Uh,
mabubuhay na naman sila. Yun. I remember that. Well, anyway, simulan na natin yung video. Balik tayo ng konti. Last week, sinimulan namin yung linguistic imperialism. So, sa halip na magsimula sa gitna, atras tayo ng konti kung saan nanggaling yung English, ano? So, nood tayo ng kaunting YouTube.
When we talk about English, we often think of it as a single language. But what do the dialects spoken in dozens of countries around the world have in common with each other, or with the writings of Chaucer? And how are any of them related to the strange words in Beowulf? The answer is that, like most languages, English has evolved through generations of speakers, undergoing major changes over time. By undoing these changes, we can trace the language from the present day back to its ancient roots. While modern English shares many similar words with Latin-derived Romance languages like French and Spanish, most of those words were not originally part of it. Instead, they started coming into the language with the Norman invasion of England in 1066. When the French-speaking Normans conquered England and became its ruling class, they brought their speech with them, adding a massive amount of French and Latin vocabulary to the English language previously spoken there. Today, we call that language Old English. This is the language of Beowulf. It probably doesn't look very familiar, but it might be more recognizable if you know some German. That's because Old English belongs to the Germanic language family, first brought to the British Isles in the 5th and 6th centuries by the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. The Germanic dialects they spoke would become known as Anglo-Saxon. Viking invaders in the 8th to 11th centuries added more borrowings from Old Norse into the mix. It may be hard to see the roots of modern English underneath all the words borrowed from French, Latin, Old Norse, and other languages. But comparative linguistics can help us by focusing on grammatical structure, patterns of sound changes, and certain core vocabulary. For example, after the 6th century, German words starting with P systematically shifted to a PF sound, while their Old English counterparts kept the P unchanged. In another split, words that have SK sounds in Swedish developed an SH sound in English. K, like skirt and skull, but they're direct borrowings from Old Norse that came after the SK to SH shift. These examples show us that just as the various Romance languages descended from Latin, English, Swedish, German, and many other languages descended from their own common ancestor, known as Proto-Germanic, spoken around 500 BCE. Because this historical language was never written down, we can only reconstruct it by comparing its descendants, which is possible thanks to the consistency of the changes. We can even use the same process to go back one step further and trace the origins of Proto-Germanic to a language called Proto-Indo-European, spoken about 6,000 years ago on the Pontic Steppe in modern-day Ukraine and Russia. This is the reconstructed ancestor of the Indo-European family that includes nearly all languages historically spoken in Europe, as well as large parts of southern and western Asia. And though it requires a bit more work, we can find the same systematic similarities, or correspondences, between related words in different Indo-European branches. Comparing English with Latin, we see that English has T where Latin has D, and F where Latin has P at the start of words. Some of English's more distant relatives, Hindi, Persian, and the Celtic languages it displaced in what is now Britain. Proto-Indo-European itself descended from an even more ancient language, but unfortunately, this is as far back as historical and archaeological evidence will allow us to go. Many mysteries remain just out of reach, such as whether there might be a link between Indo-European and other major language families, and the nature of the languages spoken in Europe prior to its arrival. But the amazing fact remains that nearly 3 billion people around the world, many of whom cannot understand each other, are nevertheless speaking the same words shaped by 6,000 years of history.
Ayun. So, hi Miss Eden. Welcome
Hello,
back.
Sir Gian. Hello, everyone. Kevin.
Hi, ma'am.
Sir Marlon. First time na ako makita si Sir Marlon.
Hi.
Musta,
Ayan.
Sir Kevin?
Okay lang
Masabi
naman.
na tayo doon.
Uy, kakulba.
Si Miss Ria. May echo ako ah.
Nag-F din ako.
May naka-open na laptop. Anyway, so ganun nga, si Miss Ria nakapagkwento na last week. Tapos kanina si Sir Kevin. So what about si Miss Eden? Ikaw naman ang magkwento.
Ano ikwento ko, Sir?
Love life, sige, love life, kwento mo daw.
Wala din. Wala din. Hindi, yung sa exam as in, na-shock ako. Ang dami palang questions. Super dami, di ba, Sir Kev? Tapos, ang part 1, tatlo kasi part. Ang part 1 pala, 2 pages.
Yes.
Tapos, ang dami-dami talaga.
Teka lang.
Sir.
May mag-mute ako. Mag-mute tayo. Miss Eden lang magsalita para walang echo.
Sige, try daw natin. Commit na kayo? Okay na? Ayan, wala nang okay. Kasi, tawag nito, tatlo nga, dalawang pages, tapos, sa isang column kasi, tatlo dapat ang piliin mo na, parang theories or situation, tapos i-explain mo yun. So, parang dun pa lang, ang dami mo nang isusulat, di ba? So, parang ginugol ko sa part 1 yata, 2 hours. Part 1 pa lang yun, ha? So, wala na akong time sa part 2. Ang part 2, reading part. Ang taas ng, ang haba ng reading na part. Tapos, mo siya, para siyang, critic of a curriculum program. So, yun. Tapos, ang sa third part, yun na yata yung Sir Kev, yung propose ka ng
Research.
parang, yun, sir?
Magpo-propose ng research.
Oo, magpo-propose ng research na may binibigay silang 3 options. So, pipili ka lang doon ng tatlong options na yun. Tapos, tama ba ako, sir? Kasi hindi ko yun na-answer.
Parang pag-ibig pala yan. Kailangan ka mamili.
Tama ba, sir? Pipili ka ng isa doon, tapos gagawan mo ng proposal?
Parang may kuha na sila, may prepared na sila ng mga topics for you, and then automatically right there and then you're gonna make your own proposal or research proposal about that topic. And then it was okay. It was okay if it was, it was our own topic. But they prepared kasi.
Meron silang mga topic na prepared na nila. Tapos, tatlong topic yun. Hindi ko maalala yung isa, pero ang pinili ko doon yung about sa education. Ano nga yun, sir? Ewan ko kung pare-pareho kaming question nila. Kasi parang iba-iba daw yata yung question eh. Tapos, ang pinili ko yung nakalimutan ko na din yung pinili ko.
Basta yun na yun.
Oo, yung about professional development yata. Yung parang ganun. Pero pinili ko lang siya. Nagsulat lang ako ng 2 sentence. Wala na, time na. Tapos yung proctor ko, hindi talaga siya nagsasalita. Nagchat-chat lang siya sa Hangouts, which is hindi ko rin mapansin. So, 10 minutes pala before sa time, sinasabi niya na, ma'am, malapit ng time, isubmit mo na. Hindi man lang siya nagsalita. Tapos sabi niya, ma'am. Sabi niya, ma'am, 2 minutes na lang, ma'am. Sabi niya, hindi talaga siya nagsalita. Tapos nung na-submit ko na after siguro mga 30 seconds sinubmit ko yun. 30 seconds before time sinubmit ko yun. Tapos, chinek ko yung hangouts. Ang dami niya ng message.
Asan ba yung hangout?
Hangout sa Google lang yun, sir. Mama, ano mo yun sa Google? Gmail ba? Sa Gmail mo. Di ba may...
Ay,
diba,
oo.
Doon, tapos may dyan, hangouts. Yun. Doon, ang dami niya naman. Hindi talaga siya nagsalita na...
Nakita ko na. Ngayon ko lang nalaman. Ayun.
Oo, doon. Tapos, ma'am. Pero anyways, dahil nga sa yung sa part 1 talaga, confident akong nag-answer doon kasi yung mga situations na nailagay doon, napag-usapan, promise, napag-usapan natin yun sa halos lahat hindi naman halos lahat, siguro mga 80% ng situations doon na nilagay nila, napag-usapan natin yun dito sa review natin. Oo, kaya very confident ako. Ang haba-haba ng sagot ko, very confident. pagdating sa sa reading, sabi ko na lang, ikikritik ko na lang kung ano yung mga napag-usapan natin. For example, sa assessment, di ba, nag-usap tayo ng assessment, nag-usap tayo nung mga about sa reading na kailangang tapos ganun, yun na lang isinusulat ko talaga kasi ikikritik mo ang tapos yun na lang talaga ang sinulat ko, so medyo maikli din yung sa reading part ko. Tapos confident na ako na matatapos na ako kasi akala ko, yun na yun. Yun pala, pag next ko, alam mo, isa pa pala. Ayan, wala na akong time dun.
Sabi niya ni Miss Ria, wag daw kaming matakot, ganyan, be confident. Sagot ko, sabi ni Miss Ria, hindi na kami takot. Matagal na kaming takot eh. So, ayun.
Parang pro na. So na-immune na.
Na-immune na.
Actually, talagang super, sabi ko nga sa yung dating, kasi ako na lang mag-isa dito, yung tumira dito na parang 2 months siyang tumira dito. Doon na kasi sa isang bahay din kasi parang nagpunta yung may-ari sa Amerika ba, so sila muna yung tumao doon. Anyway, sabi ko sa kanya, good decision talaga yung nagsali ako sa review kasi hindi ako sumali sa review. Ano na lang i-answer ko doon, 'di ba? Tatanga lang. Titigan ko lang yung mga situations doon. Imagine mo sa isang question, tatlong so that means may 3 essay ka sa part 1, sa 2 page yun. So 6 na essays doon sa sa part 1 pa lang. 'Di ba? Tapos in each of the situation, lalagyan mo yun ng theories, ng implication, yung sinabi nga ni Maika, ganun yung doon. Pero confident talaga ako doon kasi napag-usapan natin yung part 1 eh. Pagdating sa part 2, medyo nasanay na din akong parang na ba yung brain ko na nasanay na sa marami kong sinulat sa part 1. Yun lang, nagaho lang talaga ako sa time kasi kala ko 3 pages lang kasi sinabi doon 3 parts. Iniisip ko each page 1 part. Kaya basta talaga kayo kasi kasabi ko na sa inyo, 'di ba? Wala akong sa test skill. Yun na lang yung experience ko. So ewan ko, Kevin, ano bang percentage ng passing? Kasi kung naging tama ako dun sa part 1 tsaka part 2, part 1 20 points, so 40, tapos part 2 30 points, 'di ba? So 70 kung magpa-freak ako doon, may 70% ako. Kung hindi ako mapapit doon, 60-50%, hindi na masado, oh my God. Paano na yun?
Parang yung checker lang talaga yung may control kung sino yung...
Diba? Hindi naman nila sinabi kung ilang percent kailangan ipapasa yun, diba?
Oo. Pero may rubric naman sila, pero...
Yun, may rubric each part.
Yeah.
Tapos, ang overall, para mapasa doon sa mali na program, paano na yun?
Ay, nako. Ay.
Sana flow of thought na lang ang ipapasa nila. Magaling ang flow of thought nito. Pasado na to kahit isa lang i-check nila. O ganon. Pero kung each part talaga, kailangan nilang yun, lagyan nung i-apply nila yung rubric na zero na ako dun sa last part.
Hindi yan.
Ayun na yung
magdadasal na lang tayo dito.
Pray over natin.
Nagnunubina na nga ako everyday.
Kasi pagkatapos ko nag-take ng exam, wala na, kinalimutan ko lahat ng note ko. Itinabi ko na lahat.
Pero di ba naka-receive tayo, Kevin, ng nung parang, you submitted the blah 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 blah. Sabi ko, baka hindi ko na-submit yun ba, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Naka-receive tayo ng
received
gano'n,
like
no?
a notice.
Naka-receive ako, nag-submit din ako.
Yun yung
So yun, Sir John, Mamaika, and Sir Marlon, be very careful talaga sa time. Sa time limit. So, kasi parang may preview sila of the test. Like, they will tell you the test composes of 3 items, ganun. So pag basa pa lang nyo ng preview or yung instructions, dapat naka-budget na yung time nyo. And then, at least 30 minutes talaga na may time kayo to review everything. Kasi pwede naman ninyo ma-review yung mga attempts ninyo sa yung attempt ninyo. Isa lang pala na attempt. So, pwede niyo ma-review yung attempt niyo.
Okay. Ayos yan. Salamat sa mga pointers, Ma'am Eden, Sir Kevin. Okay. So, bakit natin pinanood yung kanina? Ano nga bang video yun? Tamo, pati ako nakalimutan ko. Where did English come from? Kasi kumukuha ako now ng Master TESOL. And before I did that, ang alam ko, ang English ay nanggaling sa native English speaking countries katulad ng UK, US, New Zealand, Australia. Hanggang dun lang yung alam ko. And then I found out by further research na galing pala siya sa it is a Germanic language. And then Germanic, pag sinabing Germanic, I thought na Germans. No, it's not. It's a European language. So pag sinabing Germanic, it's one of those malaki kasi yung Europe, West Germanic language na sila yung isa sa mga sumugod paakyat papunta sa British Isles. Hindi ko alam bakit hindi islands. Ibang research na yon. So anyway, yun nga yung tatlong yon. So doon ano nga ba yun? Yung Anglos, yung Jutes, nakalimutan ko yung isa. I wrote it like 3 months ago and now I forgot.
Anyway. Angles, Saxons, tsaka Jutes.
Yun, Angles. Madalas silang mabanggit kapag nanonood tayo ng mga war movies. Thank you for that, Miss Micah. You remember it. Na-encounter mo siya every week, every day, whatever. Ako na-encounter ko lang siya on this Master TESOL. At saka ito na rin, yung review na to. So, bakit natin pinag-uusapan yung na to? Kasi nga, linguistic imperialism. So, sinakop ng mga Vikings na French-speaking Vikings, yung kanilang language Old English. Magmula doon, nasakop nila yung UK. Before UK, Britain. Yung salita doon ay Celtic. Ano ba ang tama doon?
Celtic.
Naririnig ko Celtic
Celtic.
Pero yung iba, So, kaya pala pag pumunta ka sa probinsya ng United Kingdom, meron dun mga malayo yung pananalita nila sa English. Pero kahit papaano maiintindihan. So, magmula sa British, di ba, nag-expand ang British Empire. Kasama na yung US, yung Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So, what is now considered native English speakers, they were former and current part of the British Empire. And then, magmula doon, yung ginawa naman ng after World War II, sila na yung pumalit sa United Kingdom. At yung, ano ba tawag dito? yung kanilang mga rules and yung kanilang language ang most sila yung nagpakalat ng English after the British Empire collapsed. So doon naman tayo sa baka gusto niyo mag-comment si Sir Marlon. Ano yung may comment mo ron, sir? Nawala si Sir Marlon.
Sorry. Mahina kasi ang internet ngayon.
Mahina ba? Okay. Comment ka, sir. Comment ka.
Yeah.
What can you say about the spread of English language?
Blackout ako.
Kung wala, okay lang, sir.
Okay na wala. Wala. Sure.
Pass, sir. Pass.
Pass ako.
Si Sir Kevin.
Yun lang sa akin. It's just notable. It's just notable kasi na English is a lot of loan words.
Yes.
So, and then they would and it's very it's I think parang naging isa, if we'll put it in our Filipino context, na parang naging yung English na language is similar to the Filipino language that we have, which is basically just the we have the English, we have the basic Tagalog, and then they just loan from the Bisaya,
pinagsama-sama.
yeah. So parang ganyan, parang loan, it's just a mixture or loan words from other languages. So that's where also kanang I have something against with calling it linguistic imperialism. I mean, what they call this? Kanang there's kind of they think of English as a supreme language, but it's just basically loaned language. So why would you call it like that? Why would you call English as the best language? If it's just borrowed. So yeah, I think that's where that's the only thing I can comment about videos.
Wait lang, sir. May question ako. Tama ba ang understanding ko about sa imperialism dun sa linguistic? Kasi dati, ang understanding ko sa kanya, parang yung spread ng dominant language nung
ano yung tanong mo, sir?
Wait, tama wala ba ako? Yun na ng internet. Kung tama ang understanding ko sa linguistic imperialism, kasi yung understanding ko sa kanya dati is yung spread ng dominant language sa other sa colonies or tama ba yun or mali?
Sino ba yung tinatanong? Ako ba yung gusto kong mag-reply, sir?
Hindi kasi yung sa explanation ni sir, yung pag-low ng words, yung pag-hiram, yung understanding ko sa kanya, yung pag-spread ng dominant language sa ibang
yung pag-spread.
I think hindi yung pag-spread is not about the loan words, sir, but I do get your point na that the language imperialism is when a foreign language subdues
yes,
or is being used by or forced in any way sa mga native speakers.
Yes.
But
yes.
when we talk about the loaning, it's just that the structure or the how the language is comprised is that most of it are loan words from French, from other languages, and even sometimes right now we have na Filipino words in English like boondocks, and then I think may halo-halo na words.
Yes.
So yun lang. But it just shows though that English is a very flexible language. Or I don't know if correct ba yung term ko sa flexible, but you got
most
you get the point,
exposed.
Sir?
Most exposed.
Exposed.
Yes.
So yun. It's a very exposed language where all the cultures that who use it can actually contribute something to the language. But it's
Ayun.
another thing when we say language imperialism talaga. Kasi
Doon,
yun,
doon na tayo
uh,
papunta eh.
subjugation talaga yun ng foreign language to the yung mga speakers, yung mga hindi speakers ng foreign language.
Apa.
Ano kasi yung English, siya yung lingua franca of the world. Siya yung the language of business. Dati Spanish yung nauuna, and then medyo natalo yung Spanish sa Kano like more than 100 years ago. And after that, unti-unti nang nag-aaral yung mga bansa. Kung sino man yung nag-aaral ng English, sila yung kumikita ng mas malaki, sila yung nakakapag-aral, sila yung nakakapangibang bansa. So, doon na tayo papunta sa next topic na yon. So, ayun nga. Dahil yung English ang most exposed, more and more people are studying it. Although, medyo gustong i-argue ng China na mas maraming native speaker ang Chinese, ang Mandarin. Pero although that is true, yung the number of countries that use English as primary and secondary masyadong madami. Ayun na si Sir Kim. Sir Kim? Nandito na ba si Sir Kim? Anyari na wala. Hello, Sir Kim!
Hi po.
Welcome back, sir!
Thank you po. Nag-start na po ba kayo?
Nag-start na. Pero okay lang, sir. Pwede naman siyang panoorin sa pag in-upload ko na.
Opo.
Okay. So, ipi-play ko na yung yung linguistic imperialism kasi kanina diniscuss namin kung saan galing yung English language. So, makikigulo na lang tayo maya-maya. Nawala nga lang. Ayun. So, ito yung sinisimulan namin last week. So, Al Jazeera English, Rizkan Linguistic Imperialism.
Hello and welcome. Is the English language actually destroying the world's diversity rather than uniting it? The term globish has been coined to describe how a global version of English has grown in popularity, and it makes people ask whether the widespread use of English is hurting the linguistic cultures of countries or promoting multinational ties. Due largely to the economic, cultural and military dominance of Britain and the United States, English has become the world's language when it comes to conducting international business and diplomacy. There are an estimated 328 million native English speakers and as many as 1 billion people around the world learning it as a second language. But at what price to their native language and cultural roots? On today's show we ask, is the worldwide spread of English promoting global understanding, or is it simply linguistic imperialism? You can join our conversation by calling into the show or by sending us an SMS or an email. Now, joining me now for the discussion is journalist and author Robert McCrum, who's, in addition to co-authoring the international bestseller, The Story of English, has just written Globish, How the English Language Became the World's Language. He's in London. And in Copenhagen, we have Robert Philipson.
Balik tayo ng konti ron, Medyo mahaba kasi yung discussion na to, mga 22 minutes. So, pag-usapan muna natin. Last week, pinag-usapan namin ni Miss Micah ang salitang globish. So, what do you guys think of globish without without searching on Google? Kasi akala ko the first time I heard it, it sounds like fish, right? So it sounds like a type of fish like grouper or tilapia or whatever. So what do you guys think of it? What is globish? Yung first impression nyo. Sinong gustong sumagot? Sir Kim? Sir?
Hello po.
Sir,
I think yung globish po
yes.
ay clipping bang tawag na? I forgot the right term, but it is an amalgamation of two words, global and English, globish. So it is derived from those words. I think it implies or it means global English or why English is used around the world, something like that.
Okay, ayos, ayos. Ang ganda nung naisip ni Sir. Yes, yes. Si ano Sir, sino ba? Si Sir Marlon. Meron ka bang comment, Sir? Any violent reactions?
Just the same.
Just the same.
Global English or yung
Mhm.
Globish.
Yeah, I
Global
think it's
English.
ginagamit lang nila yung what we call in the linguistic portmanteau.
Portmanteau.
Yeah,
Yes.
or blended word.
Yes.
Okay, tuloy na natin yung video. Iba yung meaning niya pero at ayos yung pinanggalingan yung explanation ni Sir Kim.
In London. And in Copenhagen, we have Robert Philipson, a linguist and professor emeritus at the Copenhagen Business School. He's best known for his research, which denounces linguistic imperialism and looks at the relationship between language and power. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show. And Robert McCrum, if I could start with you there in London and just get a quick summary of what Globish is. It's a term that I guess many people wouldn't have heard yet.
Well, Globish is not my term. It was invented by a Frenchman, in fact, who was in Japan in the 1990s. And what he spotted when he was in Japan, he was a man called Monsieur Jean-Paul Nerrière. He spotted that when non-native speakers, Japanese speakers of English, used English in conversation, they did better conversationally with Koreans and Vietnamese and so forth, i.e. other non-native speakers, than they did with English or Americans. In other words, the non-native speakers do better when they have a slightly simplified version of the language than they do when they talk to somebody who has it where there's more nuance and more variety. And he coined the term Globish, and I borrowed it.
Let me ask you what the difference is between
English language.
Yeah, well, what's the difference between Globish and Pidgin English?
Well, a pidgin is the first generation of a contact language between peoples who are not who are communicating with each other, who don't share. So a pidgin will evolve in something like the Caribbean, on the slave ships during the period of during the slave trade and the period of the Middle Passage. And a Creole is then the second generation pidgin, but a pidgin is much more. It's a contact language. It's much simplified. And what I'm talking about in Globish is something which is more of a lingua franca.
Okay. Let me bring in Professor Philipson here. Sir, good to have you with us too there from Copenhagen, and ask, if everyone learned Globish, wouldn't that knowledge have a democratizing effect on those who aren't already native speakers of English?
Okay, so yun po yung pinanggalingan ng Globish. Sabi sa video, mas nagkakaintindihan daw kapag non-native speaker ay ang kausap ay non-native English speaker. What do you guys think? What do you guys think?
I think so. Bakit nag-echo talaga ang boses ko?
Mag-mute ako para mag-mute tayong lahat, si Miss Eden lang.
Hindi kasi we are like accustomed to talking to a lot of English people here from different kinds of from different countries. Like mostly there are a lot of English people here more than Americans. And of course, there are also a lot of Europeans here more than Americans really, or even Australia.
Wait. In Vietnam, mas marami ang hindi Kano?
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Europeans. Walang there are a lot of there are fewer than English people yung mga American people here, and more of European, for example, like we have Germans, Italians, French, a lot of French here. We notice now when we're in one room, and then Europeans are talking to like me, Filipinos, Vietnamese, and other nationalities. We almost understand each other, and then when English people, British to be exact, like sometimes we like, parang nakatulala lang kami ba? Ano yung sinasabi niya?
Nosebleed.
Oo, kasi, diba, they are having these idioms, like their daily expressions, which we could not really understand somehow because maybe there's a lot of like yung like slang. For example, one of the British people will say ta, but it's thank you. So paano natin malalaman na ta pala yung ta? Thank you pala yung sinasabi niya. or pag sinasabi dati pag sinasabi nila cheers to that, ganon. Ang akala ko cheers to that, mag-cheers lang kami ng wine, hindi pala thank you din pala yon. Diba? Diba? So kami, because we are non-native English speakers, we can still understand each other because we understood thank you as thank you. Cheers as cheers, not the thank you cheers. Yun yung personal experience ko with regards to that. That's the reason why I have this very good friend of mine. He's British, and then pag may mga words siya na sinasabi or may mga for example, nagbabasa ako ng book or maybe narinig ko somewhere, tapos tinatanong ko sabihin ko sa kanya, John, what do you mean by this? Tapos sabihin niya, because like this. John, what's the English of that? Gaganon ako sa kanya, oh, that's water spray. John, how do you use water spray in a sentence? Gaganon ako sa kanya. Oo, kasi is that a noun or is that a verb? No, it's a noun. I just have to say, I hit by a water spray. Yung parang okay, so it's a noun. Gaganon siya. So, yun. Parang kasi teacher din siya so in-explain niya din yun sa akin pag ganon. So, yeah, I think I understand what he meant by saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Sige po, Sir Kevin. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy kayo.
Next time ulit, sir. Next time ulit.
Sige, sir.
So, ayun nga, mas nagkakaintindihan ang mga non-native English speaker when they are talking to each other kasi we are using the simpler version of the language. Unlike mga native English speaker, they have nuances. If I remember correctly, Miss Ria, dahil yung may tinatawag na world English. Dahil kumalat ng husto yung English sa buong mundo and then we are using it in our own. Nag-i-evolve na siya paunti-unti. So meron tayong mga Pinoy English na hindi maiintindihan ng iba at meron namang English yung ibang bansa na maiintindihan natin kahit papaano. So it's a mix. So ayun nga. So tuloy na natin si Sir yung professor. I forgot his name.
Well, I agree that the Frenchman who invented the term is right that people often understand others who are using English as a foreign language more easily than native speakers. Native speakers make far fewer concessions to other users of English. But this doesn't mean that the kind of approach that he has to learning the language is relevant for learners of the language. In other words, there's no quick fix to learning English. If English is a school subject, if it's used in higher education, in universities, then what people need to have is competence which is related to the diversity of English when it's used by Americans, by Australians, by South Africans, by Indians. They need to be able to understand the diversity of types of English, whereas in terms of what they need to produce, they need English which can express their own cultural identity and their own specific needs. And the needs of the business community, which this French guy was particularly focusing on, are very limited by comparison with what general education does.
Okay, well, Robert McCrum, we had an email, if I may put to you, from Bangladesh, where our viewers write in, as you know, from around the world. Mishal Ahmed wrote in saying, English does not pose any threat to the cultures or mother tongue of the countries it infiltrates, unless those countries choose to give it away. How much power does a country have to stop the onslaught of English, in your opinion, Robert?
Okay, so how much meron ba tayong kapangyarihan para mapigilan yung ganon? Siguro sino ba yung nakatira sa island? Si Sir Marlon? Sir Marlon?
Okay, how much?
Sir, ano yung
You can
Ano po yung
able to
masasabi?
stop the onslaught of English.
Yes.
Yes. I think not, because language is dynamic and it changes from time to time. So it adapts, our language adapts to our culture, or for example, Filipino. So in our nakasabay ba ako or delayed?
Sabay
Yeah,
lang.
sabay lang.
Naman. So sa language ng Filipino, 'di ba? Parang madami din tayong na borrow na words. For example, yung groupie, selfie. So we add language is dynamic and it adapts to the generation. So yun ang so we cannot stop English from infiltrating our language. Tama ba?
Yeah, no, it's opinion. It's what
Yes.
we're learning it by opinion. So sabi mo, language. What about other parts of our lives? Particularly sa area mo.
Hmm. Sa akin kasi in terms of English, mahirap siyang i-adapt sa area sa isla because of the lack of resources or lack of influence nung language. For
There it
example,
is. Influence. Yes.
yung media. So yun doon walang signal, yung mahina ang internet, mahina ang minsan brownout or walang kuryente. So yung influence nung language minimal.
Mahina.
So mahihirapan so mahirap i-infiltrate ng English yung language doon.
Okay. That's a good point of view. The reason why I'm asking you is because sa tingin ko, you are the only one living in an island. Kasi kami, ako nasa Thailand, si Miss Eden nasa Vietnam, si Miss Maika nasa Indonesia, but we're not on a island. So I'm very curious. So
I think somehow I can relate to Sir Marlon kasi nakatira din ako dati sa, it's not an island but a bay and a very remote, not very remote, siguro pero remote area sa talagang ano siya, secluded siya ba na malayo siya sa kabihasnan, ganun. So yun, tama yung sabi ni Sir Marlon kasi minsan 'di ba nakatira kasi ako doon siguro mga high school ako. So wala pang masyadong cellphone noon, 'di ba? Yung cellphone namin yung Nokia ganun-ganun. Tapos walang signal nga doon sa baybay yung sa shore. So kailangan pa namin pumunta doon sa may plateau or may cliff
bundok.
para yung cliff ba, yung parang elevated na lugar para mag-send kami ng message. So that's really very yun nga yung sabi ni Sir Marlon na mahirap nga yung signal, yung mga bata sa city, they can really adapt English kasi nandun si Peppa Pig, nandun si Baby Bus, 'di ba? But then kung sa ganyan na mga area, talagang ang magagawa na lang talaga to influence children to speak English or to engage into English is books. Printed materials talaga, walang doon, parang old school talaga na you have to really engage those kids, give them books, give them any other kinds to influence them to use the language, parang ganun.
Awesome.
Sir, may I add something?
Yes.
So, nabanggit mo kanina na nasa Indonesia ako and I'm actually in Jakarta. So, ito yung, what do you call this, capital nung anong country. Pero to be honest, may mga times na pakiramdam ko nasa isla din ako.
Ay, ganun. Talaga?
Kasi 'di ba, for example, 'di ba, like if you're in Manila, iba yung feel. Tapos kapag pumunta ka sa probinsya, iba rin yung feel.
Yes.
Tapos when I got here, ang pakiramdam dito is para siyang probinsya. So it's quieter, people are nicer, yung mga ganong bagay. Tapos Ngayon, nakapunta na rin ako sa Bali. Ang Bali, yun talaga, it's an island. Pero, ang difference is that, sa Bali kasi, ang dami dong foreigners. So, makikita mo yung difference. So, to me, mas ang tawag dito, nakapag-acclimatize ako sa Bali more than here. So napansin ko dito, I guess when we're talking about the influence of English, not just on the language, pero on the culture as well. So if you're going to compare, for example, itong Jakarta to Manila, sa Manila, we're very much influenced by the English language.
Yes.
So ang strong ng European and American culture sa atin na our food is affected by that. The way we socialize is affected by that. Dito, very reserved ng mga tao. And then, they're very religious. Tapos, hindi sila mahilig sa American or European food. So, tapos, at the same time, kokonti dito ang marunong mag-English. And kokonti, in my experience, ang interesado mag-English. So, di ba sa Pilipinas, kapag magaling ka mag-English, parang ang taas ng tingin sa'yo.
Yeah.
Pero dito, ang experience ko, pag nag-English ka, naaasar yung mga tao sa'yo.
Ay?
Kasi in their opinion, ikaw yung nasa Indonesia, so you should be the one to learn their language. And meron silang point doon. So I guess, in terms of yung capability of a society, of a government to respond to English in terms of trying to parang develop or take care of their own culture and their own language, I think it's possible. It really depends on the society where you are in. So I guess ang naging concessions lang sa Pilipinas, especially like sa Manila, I guess, globalized tayo and modernized. Pero ang laki na ng culture natin na nawala sa atin, na hindi natin pansin. Dito, kukonti yung knowledge nila of English, pero very intact ng culture nila. So I'm not sure if that's causative or if it's correlative, pero that relationship exists. Yun po. Thank you.
Yes. Yung huli mong sinabi, Miss Maika, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but mas alam ko yung Western comic characters. Sila Iron Man, sila Batman. Hindi ko kilala si Captain Barbell at saka si Pedro Penduko. It's embarrassing. So, ayun. Tuloy na natin. Nalulungkot lang ako.
Very emotional.
Like France, for example, they become very defensive about the spread of English within French culture. But I must say I agree with the gentleman from Bangladesh. Mother tongues are very, very powerful, far more powerful than, Globish English is, it's an ersatz. It's a very ephemeral. It's very limited, as Dr. Phillipson has pointed out. It has a very limited role, and I think we should also at this point draw a distinction between the written and the spoken. But I think the truth is that the mother tongue is the essential tongue, and so that in Bangladesh and all across India you'll find the ordinary man and woman will be using their mother tongues in the home, on the street, and in all kinds of social situations. But if they need to communicate with one another for business or cultural purposes across India, then they will then default to Globish.
Okay. Robert, a quick thought. In your book, you say essentially that the English language has become a source of power in itself, and you highlight how people in countries all over the world are taking the language out of its imperial context and appropriating it for themselves. And you use Al Jazeera as an example. Explain how.
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit again?
The last bit, because you cite Al Jazeera as an example of that, of how the English language is used as a source of power in a way. Explain what you meant by that.
I was having a bit of trouble with the hearing here.
With Al Jazeera, I mean, how would you say a channel like Al Jazeera, you're saying it can be used, English language can be used by outside sources that don't have it as native language, and then they utilize it as a sort of, effectively as a power, or create a sense of power with it?
Well, I think in the case of Al Jazeera, and of course, like any other global TV station, it's a way of spreading ideas and the cultural influence of a station through the language. And of course, I think one of the phenomena we have to deal with at the moment, which is absolutely new in the history of the planet, is that for the first time in recorded history, it is possible for the English language in some form to be both transmitted and received anywhere in the world. I mean, this program could be transmitted, probably is being both transmitted and received all over the world, and it will be, and there will be within a radius of its reception point somebody or many people who will understand it, and that is an absolutely unique phenomenon. It's a real breakthrough in understanding, and I think for those of us, I don't really myself believe that it's necessarily going to be a source of global harmony, but I think that you have to agree that if people can talk to each other, then this is a step forward.
Okay. Well, Dr. Phillipson, an email to you, if I may, sir. This came in from a viewer by the name of Rizwan Khan, same name as mine. It says, though the colonists are long gone, English has stayed and flourished because all new technology is invented and introduced by those who speak it. Now, it's true that technology is often very English-centric. Why do you think that is when there are such big consumer markets outside the English-speaking world?
I don't think that's correct. In any case, I was in Korea last week and I tapped one key by mistake. And that meant that what was on the screen then was suddenly Korean rather than English. So it's not true that all invention is taking place in English. But I'd like to come back to what was said earlier, because Al Jazeera presumably also functions in Arabic. And that's because there are very large numbers of people who have Arabic as their main language who do not understand English. And when I talk about the risk of English being an imperious language, one needs to remember that any language can serve either good or evil purposes. It's a question of what functions it has. And when, for instance, Robert McCrum writes in his book that English is the language of ordinary people as well as the language of power and authority, well, it is the language of ordinary people, but only in countries like the United States, Great Britain, South Africa. No, not even South Africa, because English is the language of power there, and most South Africans cannot use English. And this means that the history of the British Isles, of the United States, was trying to impose one language at the expense of others, and largely succeeding. Most of the indigenous peoples of America and Australia have been forced to assimilate to English or French. And this means this was also the pattern that was attempted in the colonial period in much more diverse context, and has not succeeded in the same way. But it doesn't alter the fact that English is the language of the elite and not the language of ordinary people.
Okay, we have Ramzi on the phone from Ramallah. Ramzi, what would you like to ask?
I wanted to comment on the situation of the Arabs. Unfortunately, I feel that the use of the Arabic language has deteriorated, and Arabs and the Arab educational systems have to pay more attention to the uses of Arabic. I don't mean ancient classical Arabic, I mean modern standard Arabic, to be able to absorb English as a second language and still maintain their cultural identity. So there's, a push and a pull, and you have to be careful about the balance.
Ramzi, that's an interesting point, and actually, Robert McCrum, there's an interesting, point there about Arabic. In Hindi movies, in Bollywood, for example, for more and more English words to creep in. And it's now almost this kind of combination of Hinglish, as it's often called.
Hinglish.
And the same thing happens in Singaporean English and Hong Kong English. It's the capacity of the language to infiltrate the local language. And you can either deplore this and see it as Dr. Phillipson, I think, implies, see it as a sign of imperial dominance, or you can say it's just the nature of the language and it's comparatively harmless. And I don't think, I think the giveaway in his remarks is when he refers to the Aboriginal peoples of America and Australia. Yes, of course, the settlement of North America and of Australia and other parts of the world involved terrible genocides of local tribes, and there's a great need for the preservation of the language of those tribes. But generally speaking, the imposition or the settlement of English around the world was not of that sort. And the point of my book is to say that actually in the 21st century, The point of what I'm trying to say about the 21st century is that really for the first time you find, Riz, you probably see this in your travels, that you'll see people using English without really any sense of the linguistic imperialism that Dr. Phillipson refers to. I mean, it's now being used in a much more neutral way. I think there is a case for saying that Globish is, for the first time, comparatively imperiousness free.
All right, we'll get a response from the professor in just a moment. We have to take a short break. When we return, we'll look at that and also look at how perhaps languages are dying around the world and what might be done to preserve them. We'll be right back with more of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away.
Right now,
Ay.
children are at risk of starvation
Biglang
because of
nag-commercial.
extreme weather caused by climate change.
Welcome back. We're discussing the global spread of English and its effect on world languages and culture. Joining me are journalist and author Robert Crumb, who's joining us from London, and linguist Robert Phillipson, who's joining us from Copenhagen. And Dr. Phillipson, I want you to get a response to what Robert Crumb was saying about the more general use of English rather than this sort of imperialistic use. And as I bring that up, also it's interesting to know that the language most spoken by native speakers is Chinese, which is by far the largest. And I wonder if you could also add to that the thought of how influence around the world, which is growing, might actually have an impact on the way Mandarin and perhaps some Cantonese might actually emerge in language culture as well.
Okay, but I disagree with the analysis of Singapore because all instruction is through the medium of English in schools in Singapore from the beginning of school, from grade 1. And this means that the ancestral languages, meaning Chinese, Malay, and so on, are only learnt as subjects, so that the pressure on people to drop their languages in favor of English is massive. And it's now the case that half of the families of Singapore actually use English as the home language. So there's very clear evidence there that because of government decisions, English is being promoted at the expense of the other languages. And if you take the Arab world, which there was a question about a moment ago, there are many elite Arabs who go to English medium schools, often Anglo-American schools, and who go to universities which use the English medium exclusively. And this, of course, is part of the explanation for why the Arabic language has not been developed as a language of science and technology. It is, of course, used in business. English is not the only language of business.
Can we talk about Singapore?
One second, Robert. Just let the professor finish, and I'll come back to you in just a second.
Sure.
Professor, go ahead.
I've been to the Emirates a couple of times, and in the Emirates, many kids who arrive at an English medium university who are Emiratis, meaning wealthy, have not had their Arabic developed enough in school because they've been to English medium schooling, and their English isn't good enough either. And this is a crazy situation. It has to do with governments not thinking through their own language policy, how to get people really competent in a local language, and how to give them, in addition, really good competence in English.
Interesting point. And Robert, I want you to respond to that, and also the fact that I guess people are pushing for English as a language so they can have a global competitive advantage when it comes to doing...
Absolutely. I just want to take up the case of Singapore. The case of Singapore is very interesting. It's like a language laboratory, and I've watched it for not closely, obviously not as closely as Dr. Phillipson. I've watched it reasonably closely over the last 30 years. And, of course, the language policy of Singapore does reflect essentially an authoritarian regime, making no doubt bad choices. But the attempt by Lee Kuan Yew, who I interviewed actually many years ago, was to try to solve the linguistic incoherence of the island. The island itself is a state which has been trying to benefit its people economically through this very well. They've tried different things. They've tried Mandarin, and then they've gone back to what they call the English first policy. But it was done in good faith, I think, by the government, which is indeed an authoritarian government. It was an attempt to liberate the people from the incoherence of the linguistic inheritance.
Okay, let's get a caller in from the UK. Imam's on the line with us. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please, Imam.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. Let's have your question.
I'm a West African. I came from Sierra Leone, and we have 16 languages in Sierra Leone, 16 tribes with different dialects. But with the coming of English in Sierra Leone, it made it very easy for us all to have one general language. So that's a very big, what should I say?
Right.
It's kind of
an advantage
for us. So to say English is becoming an imperialistic language, I don't believe at all. It's very good for the world.
Okay,
for us all to have one English, for one language that we all can communicate in.
Imam, let me put that question to Dr. Phillipson also with an email that touches on that from the UK from Tariq Al-Basha, who says, does the decline of other languages in exchange for English have political and economic outcomes for those countries? Now, I wonder, Professor, what our viewer of Imam there was saying along with this email, it suggests that there may be some benefit then if if the language is replaced by something like English.
Well, obviously, the proportion of people in former colonies in both the British and the French colonial countries in Africa is very, very small. And clearly English is the language of power. That's why everyone wants to learn it. That makes sense. But on the other hand, when, for instance, a writer like Ngugi from Kenya has been a very successful novelist in English and chooses to write novels as an alternative in Kikuyu, it's because he wants to reach a different audience. And if you want all of the languages to thrive because they're important for people's heritage, then you need policies which, in fact, encourage multilingualism in education, not either or, not either African languages or English. And this is exactly what is being done in many parts of the world. And interestingly, just to go back to Lee Kuan Yew, he now regrets not concentrating more on Chinese because, as you mentioned earlier, Chinese is in fact incredibly important and is increasing importance, and the Chinese know that.
Actually, Dr. Phillipson, a quick question for you about what is coming out as fairly disturbing news. Experts are saying that by the end of the century, half of the world's roughly 6,000 languages are likely to go extinct. That's about one language dying every 2 weeks. And I think earlier this year, the UN identified 18 languages with only one remaining. How would you describe what the impact is for the loss of a language for a nation or people?
Well, there's a pecking order of languages in any given country, and English happens to be at the top many places, but not everywhere. There is a need for many languages, but the pecking order means that if English is dominant, for instance, other languages, Swahili may be important in Tanzania, and then the rich diversity of hundreds of languages in countries like Nigeria and Tanzania will be disappearing as time goes on. And that is a tragedy because knowledge of how to manage biodiversity, cultural diversity are embedded in the languages, and that's why it's important that the risk of half the world's languages being finished by the year 2100 or even more is in fact a very considerable one because of mismanagement of language policy in the country, in particular in education.
Robert McCrum, we had an email from Greece, if I could put to you, from Vicky Nikolaidis, who wrote in saying, I'm fortunate to have English as my first language, yet I'm sad because the language isn't particularly flexible enough to meet the needs of different cultures. Now, I wonder, when you have this kind of situation where people say it's, English is an advantage, but of course it has its limitations, is it just simply a case that people have no choice but to embrace English? It's the language of the air, it's the language of the sea, it's the language of so much technology and still dominates the internet. Is it a case of having to literally embrace English with no choice?
Yes, because, I think that's true. And obviously, there is a sadness involved in this. One regrets that, but it's clear. It is a lingua franca, and that's as Latin was 1,000 years ago. That's the role it plays, and it brings with it problems. And obviously, for your Greek correspondent, it's a disappointment that it's not more flexible and more useful to her. But she has her mother tongue, and she probably knows other languages from the region, so that English is, to go back to the multilingual point, it becomes part of a menu of options, linguistic options, available to a Greek, to a Turk, to a Cypriot. And if a Greek and a Turk wish to communicate about something of serious consequence, politically or economically, they will default to the lingua franca, which is English, and that is, in my view, promotes some kind of harmony, and that's probably a good thing.
Okay. Professor, just a minute to go, so I just want your view on, you mentioned about the poor policies of governments in terms of preserving their languages. Is it simply the responsibility of governments, or is there another way to police the loss of these languages and the loss of the linguistic strength that certain nations might have? a brief answer.
Well, obviously there should be much more bottom-up movement, because people who speak a small language typically do want to maintain their language. And one knows from the way Welsh and now Scots Gaelic are being promoted much more in the United Kingdom that this is not at the expense of learning English. But I'd like to say one more general point, and that is you don't get far in Latin America with English. You don't get far in Southern Europe with English. So the idea that English is the only really important language in the world for cultural, economic, political, and all sorts of other purposes is simply not true. There is much greater linguistic diversity.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, there I have to stop you, unfortunately, because we're out of time. A fascinating conversation. We conducted in English. I wish we could have done it in others, but thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for being with us, and remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on the topics and post your questions and comments. On the next show, Divided Democracy, as voters in the United
Okay, so that's it for that video. Medyo diniretso ko na para stop na natin siya. Okay, so there is a positive and a negative of using English. Well, for me, it's both. Okay? Because of English, sa mga yung mga hindi pa nakakaalam, I hated English when I was a kid growing up. Yeah, really. So it's parang it grew on me dahil English yung mga TV show, comic books. So I started learning English, and now I'm earning money from it. So I'm not sure if ganun din yung naranasan ninyo, but for me, it's both a positive and negative to learn English. What about you guys? What do you think? Oh, wala sumasagot.
May I, sir?
Yes, please.
So first, gusto ko lang mag-comment din sa sinabi ni Macrom na he thinks that right now, mostly English is being used for non-imperialistic reasons. I feel like that's very naive. Kasi we have to remember that this is very systemic. So, our reasons right now, kahit na feeling natin it's very innocent, saan ba nanggaling yung goal natin, yung drive natin to speak English? That is coming from the systems that have been built into our society. So, a lot of countries na marunong mag-English yung mga bata, their government actually tells them to speak English. So like in the Philippines, na all of our everything in our government is written in English. Maybe lately na lang siguro.
Our law is English.
Yeah, our law is also in English. Nakikita ko na lang lately, probably it started when I started working, na nagpo-produce na rin sila ng mga forms sa government offices na in Tagalog. Pero before, alam ko, puro in English pa rin eh. So, mag-motivate tayo to speak English, hindi dahil gusto lang natin because it's fun, kung hindi because it's a necessity. And ang mga tao na nag-impose sa atin ng necessity na yon is yung government. And in the first place, sino ba yung naglagay ng pressure na yun sa government? It's the colonists. So, you're gonna go back to that again and again. So, mahirap to say that we're all using English just because we want to. Babalik tayo dun sa, it's a systemic issue. Ayun, thanks.
Thank you, Miss Micah. Sir Marlon, Sir Kim.
Sino muna?
Okay, Sir Marlon.
Okay. I still agree with what Miss Micah said, na English is still the language of power because of how we see it today. Yung perspective natin sa English, ganun pa din yung this is the language of the elite. And for even sa isla, dun saan ako nagtuturo, yung iba yung perspective nila kapag yung isang tao na fluent sa English.
Mm-hmm.
and it is not only used for example, sa mga natural conversations. That's all.
Okay, that's all. Thank you, sir. Si Sir Kim, comment po, sir. Ay, ano nangyari?
Hello?
Sige, sir. Sige, sir. Sige.
Nabaliktad yung camera. Okay, what I will share, sir, is about the implications. Maybe we are driving towards the political side of how English language is used in schools and what are
Yes.
the implications in a bigger picture. But maybe I could share something about how what are the implications of these things? Why are we discussing this? I have here, meron akong libro dito, Fundamental Concepts of Language Teaching by Stern. There are typologies on bilingual education. Maybe focus siya sa bilingual education. I will flip the camera so that you could see this one. I will send later yung picture nito. Sa typology na ito,
Sir, baka may
kinakategorize
PDF ka.
ng
Sorry. Baka may
hindi po
PDF.
libro po siya.
Libro?
Mackey's Typology of Bilingual Education. Sa typology na ito, kinakategorize niya yung context kung nasaan yung bata in terms of ano yung nature niya. Definitely, mga second language speakers sila. Tapos, saan nag-occur yung English language. May 3 conditions dito. Home, school, apat pala. Home, school, area, and nation. Tapos, ang implication nito is paano i-design yung curriculum based doon kung ano yung mas dominant ang English language. Mas dominant ba siya sa bahay? Mas dominant ba siya sa school? Mas dominant ba siya sa paligid ng bata sa kanyang typically sa nation? Tapos mas dominant ba siya sa area, sa local area ng bata? So based doon kung saan dominant yung English language, doon i-design yung curriculum. So ganun yung implication dito. Bakit dinidiscuss yung ito yung isa sa mga nagsusupport. Bakit dinidiscuss ang politics or ang economic implications ng pagtuturo ng English. Ano yung mga political side ng pagtuturo ng English? Kasi nagdedepende yung dominance ng English language doon sa location niya at paano i-design yung curriculum based doon sa mga criteria na yon. But that is on Mackey's typology of bilingual education. Yun yung focus niya. Ang focus niya is kung saan dominant ang English language, doon ipapattern yung curriculum ng pagtuturo ng English. Yan yung point ni Mackey. Kaya dinidiscuss niya rin doon ang mga political and economic aspect ng English language. Yan po, sir. Isisend ko sa group chat yung picture, sir.
Thank you. Wow. Oo nga, no. I did not imagine it that way. I did not see it that way. Kung ano yung dominant language, yun ang gagamitin sa pag-aaral. Wow. Okay.
Actually, yun sana yung yun yung one of the goals ng MTB, yung mother tongue ba? Kaya lang, yun nga yung what's wrong with that is yung implementation is mali. Dapat nga, yung yung dominant language, yun yung ituturo ng bata. Instead, ang ginawa nila kung ano yung language ng region na yun yung itinuturo nila. For example, sa General Santos City, kasi ang General Santos is very diverse ang daming dialects ang daming languages, Ilocano, Kapampangan, Cebuano, may mga different kinds of Muslims pa, Maguindanon, Maranao, iba-iba yun iba-iba yung language. Ang tinuturo nila Cebuano. Bakit hindi nilang Tagalog wherein ang lahat ng tao sa Jansen nagtatagalog? Yun yung dominant language doon. Yun yung nagiging problem ng maganda yung MTB pero mali yung implement dun.
Hi, may I comment on
Yes
that?
po.
Kasi I'm a teacher in DepEd.
Yes po.
So, we have what we call contextualization. So, in Bicol kasi, I'm from Bicol, we have a lot of dialect. Well, madaming versions ng Bicol. Sa Sorsogon, Masbate, Albay, Kamsur, Kamnorte. Iba-iba yung Bicol. But sa textbooks na nilabas ng DepEd, we use the standard Bicol from Naga. So, yung ginagawa dito sa Sorsogon, kino-contextualize namin yung Bicol Naga into our language. Pero yung problem lang yun, yung mga textbooks, naka-base sa standard Bicol. Pero yung pag-teach namin, according sa, or depende sa language or dialect namin dito. So, kino-contextualize yun yung words, yung stories.
I think maganda yung naging implementation sa inyo, sir. Kasi yun nga yung nagiging kino-contextualize nga.
Yes po.
How about in another region? For example, sir my friend ako, na-interview ko ito, kasi di ba pina-interview tayo that time nung sa natin, sa subject natin for the forum. Nag-interview ako from Baguio City. Ang Baguio City, nila, I don't know, anong language nila, pero parang ang tinuturo nila is Ilocano or something, which is ang dominant na doon, ang dominant na language doon is Ibaylo, something like yung parang Ifugao or something like that, Ibaloy. Tapos bakit tuturuan sila ng Ilocano? Hindi naman mother tongue ng mga yon. Nandun na tayo sa contextualization, yung pag-aalap ng mga stories, ng mga ganun. But then Ibaloy and Ilocano are two different languages. So ibig sabihin mag-aaral pa ang mga Ibaloy ng Ilocano to learn the mode of instruction.
Yes po. Yun yung mga flaws ng MTB.
Diba? Kasi hindi sila makakahanap ng Ibaloy. For example, hindi sila nakakahanap ng Ibaloy to teach Ibaloy. So, Ilocano lang ang nandoon. So, ipapaturo nila ng mga to teach that is Ilocano. Another na naman yun. Burden na naman yung mga estudyante. Bakit hindi nila sa tuturuan ng English? English naman ang instruction doon or Tagalog para isahan na lang kung mag-aaral sila ng another language, why not na lang the national language or the English language that they can use in further education, di ba?
Yes po. But nung sa video, di ba, parang yung purpose kasi ng government, yung parang i-preserve yung I get the point na mali yung language na yung mode ng language. But yung purpose kasi nun, yung ma-preserve yung language or yung dialect.
Okay, so yan naman din yun, sir. Naano ko din. Nag-interview din ako ng Indian. Kasi ang Indian, there are a lot of languages din doon, di ba? Ang ginawa daw ng India, sir, they don't push it as mode of instruction. To preserve their own language in their region and in the province, dalawa yung subject nila. It's only a subject, not the entire mode of instruction. That's how they preserve the language. Yun yung sinasabi ng Indian kasi matagal din nilang binubuno ang Indian Education Department on how they preserve their language eh. So yun yung naging nila. Dalawang kasi pareho ang sitwasyon ng India, pareho ng Pilipinas. In the same region, there are still a lot of provincial languages. So ang ginawa nila, there are two subjects ng languages nila. It's not mode of instruction. Their mode of instructions are still English. They only have two subjects, which is the Hindi and their own mother tongue, which is only a subject. That's how they preserve their language. Yun po.
Parang galit na galit si Miss Eden. May
versus MTV.
Very intense lang ako kasi talaga yung, ang point ba ng Pero naintindihan ko naman kung where is the Philippine education now sa implementation nila ng MTLB. Yung sinabi ni Micah dati na ano na ba, na-assess na ba, ano pa yung, ano ba yung paano mo ba yun in-explain, Micah, na baka lang sa stage na to, ito yung expectation ng DepEd na parang dito talaga magde-decline. Paano mo yun in-explain, Micah? Hindi ko yun yung sa assessment yata yun na napag-usapan natin. Yung parang may sila ba, for example, ang implementation stage. So yung kung itong stage na to, ito yung expectation ng government na magfo-fall down yung magde-decline yung ng mga bata kasi ito nga yung projected nila na nga this year mag-aano talaga yung nila, tapos saan na ba sila ngayon sa implementation or na-evaluate ba nila ang ganoon? Paano nga yun? Explain mo nga ulit.
Yeah, so I think sa assessment to na dapat merong space for washback afterwards. Kasi ano yung purpose ng assessment if afterwards malaman mo nga na the kids are failing in this
Ano yung sabi?
area.
Washback? Sorry?
Washback. Yung sa last step
Okay.
ng evaluation.
Kung malalaman mo na mayroong difficulties yung mga bata sa isang certain area, but you're just gonna let it go. So ano pa yung naging purpose ng assessment? So parang ang tanging naging purpose na lang ng assessment is for you to identify if they can move forward another grade. Pero paano naman yung ibang purposes of assessment? Like diagnostics or like assessing ano yung specific areas na strengths or weaknesses ng mga bata, what are you gonna do with all of those results? So I feel like dapat merong space for that after assessment ang curriculum. So pag na-identify nila yung strengths or weaknesses ng mga bata, they could actually use that result to either inform them in their creation of instructional materials or inform them in the way that they are teaching the children. Ayun.
Tapos yun nga yung naitanong ni Micah dati na saan na ba anong stage na ba ng evaluation ang nagagawa ng MTB natin sa Pilipinas? Kung nandoon pa sila sa point na wherein ine-expect talaga nila na these years are magde-decline talaga yung ang performance ng bata, if they are on the right track. Pero kung ang expected nila this year is to rise na yung yung kumbaga pa na review na nila, na redesign at saka reevaluate na nila yung curriculum, tsaka naglabas na sila ng another material to move forward to another stage of that implementation, then that's good. So hindi natin alam ngayon kung saan na ba talaga ang stage ba, ano ng point ng evaluation ang ginawa sa implementation ng MTBL.
Miss Ita, naalala ko na yung eksaktong sinasabi mo. Yung sinabi ko before is sana meron silang projected time na by this point, for example, like kung nilabas nila yon 5 years ago, na by, for example, December of 2021, we are going to check kung na-achieve na natin lahat ng goals natin in terms of implementing yung MTBMLE. And then, if we did not, and then we're going to reassess, tama ba yung paggamit natin ng curriculum na yon? Should we change it or should we just add something? So, yun yung wino-wonder ko na ano kaya yung contingency plan nila should this curriculum not work?
Contingency. Okay. Kailangan may plan B.
Exactly, yes.
Ayos. Okay. Wow. Parang sasabog ang aking utak, ha? Okay. So, hindi pa natin nakukuha lahat ng topics for 207. So, ano pa lang yun, it's only the tip of the iceberg. There are like in this linguistic imperialism, there are I forgot, Miss Eden, around 8 to 10 subtopics. Meron pang resistance. So, I don't know if you guys want to tackle that or move tayo sa isa pang subject para maano naman tayo sa ibang subjects. Hindi ko na makita yung ano ko yung study guide, course guide. Okay.
Miss Eden, nakamute ka po.
Naka-mute.
Ito ba yun? Yung second language teaching ba yung sinasabi natin? This one?
Share mo daw. Yun. Linguistic imperialism. Nasa
Dito?
baba, nasa dulo ako eh, nasa dulo. Ako yung last topic. And then ang dami pa niyang subtopics.
Ayan, language,
Yun.
politics.
There you go. Ang dami niyang subtopics. So would you guys want to do this next time? Meron pa palang code switching, do this or move tayo sa ibang subject and then we can go back and forth with some of these topics para mas marami tayong ma-cover.
Ako, I wanna move on po.
Move on. Okay. Ganun talaga pag nasaktan. Gusto na natin mag-move on. So,
Grabe siya.
So, what would you like to naka 201 na tayo eh. 201, this is
Sa
207.
instructions kayo, reading instruction, hindi pa natin na-touch yun. Reading
Okay.
instruction.
Let's do
yan.
that.
204.
204. Let's go 204.
We'll get
Baka sakaling doon tayo lumigaya. 204. Lagi may hugot, no? Grabe.
204 pala second language teaching. 205 pala development. Ito yung development kasi kailangan nyo to eh. Kasi ito na yung reading programs eh. Dito na kayo yung mag-critic ba?
Anong subject po ulit? Yung 04?
205.
205.
Development of language and literacy programs.
Okay. Yung kulay asul. There you go.
Ito
Professor Nima.
Ooh.
Oh my goodness. Allah. Okay, who wants to do the honors? Ayan, course outline. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 units.
4 units. Kasi kailangan nyo yan sa reading. Ito yung i-assess nyo.
Sino ang taya?
Actually, feeling ko ang gawin nyo lang dito, no?
Parang pwedeng pagsamahin yung 1 and 2?
I think so.
And then 3. Tapos yung 4 case studies naman. So, do we wanna do that now?
Yung na lang, 1, 2 pagsamahin nyo, tapos yung 3 ibahin. Tapos yung pag sa 4 na, ang gagawin nyo dyan, i-present nyo na lang yung ginawa nyong reading program. Tapos i-critic nyo ang isa't isang program nyo.
Kasama ka nun, di ba? Ikaw inilalayo mo yung sarili mo.
Ako sa problema na hindi na ako magkikritik.
Kahit na, paano pag pumasa ka, di ba, sa MLLE, di ba, gagamitin mo yan.
Sige. Yan na lang yung gagawin natin kasi para malaman ko kung paano nyo ginawa ang mga proposals. Ang mga reading programs nyo. Makikicopy ako sa mga reading programs. Ganon na lang yung gagawin natin dito for
I like it. I agree. Sinong gusto? Sir Marlon? Sir Kim?
Napapainom mo din ako ng tubig. Stressed ako.
Yes, Sir Marlon?
Ano na yan, Sir Marlon?
Pwede naman. Sige. Sana hindi mag-brown out and okay ang internet. But I can...
Try natin yan, sir.
Sir Marlon, para hindi ka mahirapan, maghanap ka na lang ng mga existing na slides at saka
Yes
videos.
pa.
Yung sir, yung maganda yung yung slide din dito ni Professor H.
Ay, si Prof H nga yung natin, no?
Yung niya, 'di ba tatlong presentation ang ginamit niya doon. Yun na lang, I think
Apa.
na yun, okay na yun.
Yes pa.
For natin.
Okay.
Ginamit ko yun sa presentation ko sa school.
Lagot ko.
Sige, I'll discuss 1 and 2
Yes.
overall and language literacy programs. Sige po.
Sige.
Ba't parang may bahid ng pagsisisi yung boses mo?
Hindi, mas okay ako dito. Parang yung overall perspective, medyo lang naman to. Parang
naalala ko, maikli lang yan na
maikli lang to. Parang differences lang ng formal, non-formal, and informal.
Yes.
Okay.
Sige.
Teka lang stop recording ko lang bago tayo